Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Soul Goals. My name is Dawn, and I'm so glad you're tuning in today. I have a really special guest, a good friend of mine from how long do we go back? Like, is it been 10 years or more?
I
What?
was
No.
thinking about it. So I think it's 12 because
Ooh,
Kate and Claire are 17. And if they started kindergarten at 5. So
mathing skills for me is hard. You're
yeah.
very good at that.
Yeah.
Okay. So Erin and I go back at least 12 years with our children. And then Erin is a mother of four. So Claire is her oldest. How
Mhm.
old is your youngest now?
Simon's 9.
Okay, so spanning 9 to 17. Let's just talk about your household, when Claire was little and you had the other 3 boys underneath her.
So
I mean,
yeah, Claire was 7.5 when Simon was born. So I had 4 under 7.5. And I mean, just chaos. Just surviving. I mean, luckily Claire and Nathan are 16 months apart, so they were kind of old enough to entertain themselves, be somewhat helpful. So it was really George because he was 3
yeah.
that I really had to kind of keep an eye on in a sense. So it was actually easier having 4 with the older 2 being older than it was when I had the 3 because they were like 4 and under.
Okay.
So that was actually harder.
Well, I guess that makes sense because they can they're buddies and they kind of hang out together and do their
Yeah,
thing.
I mean, yeah, Nathan and Claire play together really well. They're
Mhm.
still kind of, you know, almost like an old married couple is what we tell them, essentially.
Oh, I love that. I love it. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Well, today I'm glad to have you on the show today because I it's something that's near and dear to my heart. It's mental awareness and mental health advocacy. And Erin has done so much work on herself personally through her own story, and she is stepping forward bravely and sharing a part of her journey with us today. And I think it's something that is extremely relatable that isn't necessarily talked about very often. So for that, I'm going to applaud you for having the strength and the tenacity to be able to verbalize what it is that you went through and what it is that you have been dealing with for quite some time since you were a teenager.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah, you're welcome. So welcome to the show, my friend,
Thank
Erin.
Yay.
Yay, yay. I'm so glad you're here and I'm so glad that we had this opportunity to talk and then we don't get to see each other anymore because the kids are in high school and driving themselves and the little ones are I don't have little ones anymore where yours are. So,
Yeah, I mean, I've got 3 different schools because Claire and Nathan are in high school, and then I have George is at middle school and Simon's elementary. So yeah, we're just all over. But
what
it
a
does
plus
help. Now
going
that she
on.
drives, it's a big help.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I
Yeah.
remember when my oldest one got her license, and I remember thinking, my oldest brother said, "Oh, all of those monumental milestones are so great. Like when they're potty trained, when they can feed themselves, when they go to school, when they can brush their own teeth, all that stuff." He goes, "But I'm going to tell you, nothing prepares you for when they get their license."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh, okay," because I kept looking forward to it, but so I could not express to both of my girls enough the importance of you're driving a car and it's a motorized vehicle that is yeah, you need to be
Heavy.
yeah, yeah, you
Yeah.
need to be careful.
Yeah.
Please, 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 please.
Yeah.
All right, so Erin was born and raised in New Jersey.
Mhm.
So that that whole area, tell me a little bit about it because I'm from Ohio, but I'm not like the Jersey area is a little bit different than the Midwest.
Yes. Jersey is, you know, it's on its own. When you think of a lot of people, their first, I feel like, big introduction to New Jersey is the Jersey Shore show. And that
Yes.
okay, that is real, and
Yeah.
I've been to that place where they filmed it, but
Okay.
that is like a very small pocket of, so when I say to people I'm from Jersey, or I'll be like, "The Jersey came out in me," what that means is, like, New York and New Jersey, I feel like, are kind of known for being a little bit fast-paced and a little bit harsh and sometimes aggressive,
Yeah, yeah.
and so that really did kind of form And obviously my journey, part of that has been toning that down, but not letting my personality, fade away.
Yeah.
Um, I grew up in actually a pretty small town, only about 2 square miles.
Oh, wow.
So
That's
yeah,
very small.
there's a lot of like little towns, and we were slightly northwest of New York City.
Mhm.
So my dad commuted into Brooklyn for work for a really long time. That was
Okay.
kind of common. So it was essentially the suburbs. And then you could drive, an hour south and be at the beach. And
That's
that's where my
nice.
parents currently live. They split their time between Lebanon and New Jersey, near the beach. So
Got it. Got
yeah,
it. Okay. So tell me a little bit about you. I know you have at least one sister. Do you have other siblings?
I have an older brother and an older sister. Yes.
Okay. Got you. Got you. Tell me a little bit about your time in New Jersey as a teenager, because that was when a lot of your stuff started happening for you. And your journey with self harm is where this all began as a teenager.
Yes. So I have an older sister, older brother, two parents, married, still
Mhm.
married. And then my grandmother lived with us. She moved in before I think I was even born.
Yeah.
So it's my dad's mom. So, and that was a huge benefit, looking back, because she
Mm,
became the safe place. Her bedroom, her as a person became the safe place, in my childhood growing up.
right.
Um, so I'm trying to think where to start, I guess. So I feel like I was kind of your typical like middle class, upper middle class family.
Yeah.
Our school system was just our one town, so very different from here where it's like county based.
Yes.
So we had 3 elementary schools that all fit into one middle school, that all fit into one high school. So it was small. I graduated with, I think, 125 kids in my high school class.
Right.
So it was tiny.
Yeah.
So, you kind of knew everybody. Even if you didn't go to elementary school, you played sports, the rec
Mhm.
teams, and you just, would see people at the local pool and the playgrounds and stuff. So very small. I was always a really good student. And I don't remember any type of like pressure.
Okay.
It was just it was just the way I was. I played some sports. In high school, it wound up being just cross country, and then softball was kind of my big sport.
Yeah.
Um, but I also had kind of this like, maybe not secretive life. Maybe it's more normal than I think, but I was a straight A student, followed all the rules, but then on the weekends, my friends and I are drinking and we're,
Mhm.
getting into stuff we kind of shouldn't be.
Gotcha.
And then I just started being like, I was really angry as a teenager.
Right.
Really angry. I like couldn't wait to get out of New Jersey. That was like my number one goal was
Mm.
get me out of the state, get me away from my family. I just wanted to leave.
Yeah. Okay.
So when it came time for college, my parents had this rule for my sister where she couldn't go more than 2 hours away.
Oh, okay.
And then for me, I don't know why that changed, but I went about 6 hours away in Virginia.
Gotcha. And
Um,
did you know that you definitely, like you were saying, you wanted to get far away from that area? Like that
Yeah,
was
so for some reason in my head, I was like, I don't wanna be in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York, because they all border New Jersey, even though Pennsylvania is a giant state.
yeah,
I was like, if it touches the state, I wanna be far away.
nothing of it.
I'm
Yeah.
out, right. So I visited colleges in New England, and then I went down to Virginia, and I wound up, in Virginia.
Okay.
So when I started self-harm, I was, I think, 16,
Mhm.
and I wish I could pinpoint like why, if that
Right.
makes sense.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm a little bit unique, and maybe not. I've just never heard of this. And that I think when people think of self harm, they think of someone who's like really depressed
Right.
and they're like, in their room and they're like just trying to feel something, right?
Yes. Yeah.
My self harm was all based in anger and rage.
Okay.
So when you think of people who just have a lot of rage and they punch holes in walls or they throw things or I did that, but to myself.
Okay.
And for some reason, I felt that was better to inwardly harm myself than to outwardly display this anger.
That kind of behavior, yeah.
Right, or damage, property, like, for
Okay.
some reason in my head, that was better.
Yeah.
And so I do wanna give a trigger warning in case any of this is too graphic.
Correct, yes.
So I didn't use what you might think of like razor blades. I used my keys because
Mhm.
they were there,
Yeah.
right? So they were always there with me. Um, and then another type of self-harm I think people don't realize is punching yourself, pulling your hair, biting yourself. Those are kind of my other ways.
Yeah.
So when I was again 16, maybe 17, I had some friends that knew,
Okay.
partly because I couldn't always cover it up, if it was on my arms.
Yeah.
So my best friend and I came up with this like plan. We
Okay.
wanted my parents to know so they could get me help, but I was too scared to tell them.
And you were 16 at the time or younger?
16.
16.
No, 16. I don't think it started before that.
Okay.
So we went to my guidance counselor at our school
Mhm.
and we said, "Hey, we have this friend and she does this." And then I left the room and my friend went back in and said, "Well, actually, it's about her." But we had planned this, like,
Okay.
we had kind of come up with the scheme, and so basically the counselor was kind of forced to
To
tell
do
my
something then,
parents
yeah,
because
yeah.
it was serious. So I started seeing a therapist,
Mhm.
probably relatively soon after. It was in the town next to us,
Uh-huh.
and all I really remember is her always wanting to talk about my parents, like,
Oh,
the
okay.
relationship with my parents.
Okay.
And I think I understand now looking back that what she probably was trying to get to was, um, what was behind all the anger and the rage
Yeah,
and
understandably, yeah.
and the trauma, but
Mhm.
trauma, like, I feel like it wasn't really a word back then the way
Right,
it is
right.
now. Um, but I just remember going, "I just want to stop doing this."
Yeah.
And she was not giving me any coping skills, anything practical.
Okay. The
And
therapist wasn't?
no. It
Oh,
was from what I remember, it was all just talking,
okay.
and I just but I was a teenager, I didn't know how to kinda speak up for myself and say, "Hey, this isn't working,"
Yeah,
and then my parents, they never asked about it, my mom would drop me off, pick me up, and that was it. Like,
yeah,
didn't, do any follow through, didn't ask, nothing. Um, so it was very hard to talk to them in general because and this might be getting ahead a little bit, but a lot of my trauma really stems from my childhood, not physical abuse, not sexual abuse, just really verbal.
yeah.
My dad, I kind of quote learned it from him, the rage and the anger.
Okay.
He was just it was constant walking on eggshells.
Mm,
Really little things would kind of set him off and he would
mhm.
throw things, punch walls. I mean, just yelling, yelling, yelling. And
Yeah.
my mom was just very like, just kind of took it.
Okay, she didn't
Um,
say anything to it, yeah.
no, I mean, as the years went on, she started talking back a little bit,
Mhm.
but at the time, it was just very like she kind of just took it.
Yeah.
Didn't really say one thing one or the other. And so that's why my grandma was so instrumental because
Yeah, it was a safe place for
it was
you.
our safe place. We'd
Yeah.
go in her room. She was diabetic, but she would hide like cookies in her room. So like
So you would know, yeah, yeah,
yeah, I mean, sometimes he was so angry that we were too scared to go in the kitchen to eat
yeah. Did you
because
ever, like, as an adult now looking back, did you ever uncover what that anger was for him? Or I mean, maybe you assume what that could have been? I don't know, maybe he's addressed maybe he hasn't addressed it. I don't know.
I don't know that he does. I mean, over time, he has said things about his childhood. And so now that I understand childhood trauma, I'm assuming he just has a lot of trauma that has not been addressed.
Correct.
And so, the great thing about learning about trauma and how it can be generational is that you're not giving excuses to people, but people don't know what they don't know.
Right.
is one of the things I like to say.
Right.
So if people aren't exposed to this idea of trauma or generational trauma or anything, it's not like he was intentionally, quote, "giving me trauma," or
Right.
intentionally it was just he was probably not given any sort of coping skills,
Correct, yeah,
and
and
it was
that's that what you said, that's that generational thing, and I think that when you can recognize it, when you've been in treatment like you have been, and that recognition for yourself comes about, then you can look at that situation in a much different light, and it doesn't make it okay. I think for me, the hardest part was understanding that I'm not forgiving the actions necessarily, but I'm forgiving myself and the person and understanding more about the context of why it was that they acted the way they did.
Yeah, that's what it is, it's the context, and it's now understanding that, um, you know, they were doing the best they could. I think for them, they showed love through providing, a house and vacations and clothes, and, my parents both worked, and,
Yeah.
um, partly because my grandma was there to watch us,
Yeah.
and yeah, so I really, I don't doubt their, love for me.
Yeah.
I really think they were doing the best with what they could.
Yeah.
My mom was definitely not to the degree of my dad in terms of anger at all. She was more of a yeller,
Mhm.
but not, like, to that scary level.
Yeah. Yeah.
But she still it wasn't like I felt like I could go to her with problems or
Right.
issues or anything, and so I was kind of in my little world of, "Okay, my grandma's the safe place," and then I have friends. I had a pretty big group of friends. We were this, like, mishmash of, like, jocks and the smart kids and the, weird like, we just were this weird, like, combo, and so I had a really good group of friends, which is why I was out anytime I could be. Any weekend
Right.
night I could be out, I was out.
Right.
And, I had a job starting at 15 and again, being in sports. So I was very involved and very active. And I wonder, as I'm saying this out loud, I wonder if part of that is I was trying to get away,
Yeah.
so I was
Yeah.
trying to be
Interestingly,
busy.
that's a great point that you bring up because, I had another guest actually speak about that last week in a conversation about staying busy to avoid the trauma, and that was one of the like, one of the things that she had learned through her therapy was that um, we tend to do that in an effort to not have to address it, but it's the only coping skill that we know necessarily because there's times like you're a mom of 4 children. Like that's you got a lot going on, you
Yeah,
know? So at any given point in time, if you're triggered and something happens, something comes up, it's not that you can just say, "Okay, kids, I'm gonna push the freeze button and you're gonna stop right there and I'm gonna go ahead and take care of myself."
right.
You have to shelve yourself and go back to it. You have to be able to be self-aware enough to do that, and I think that's, a lot of times we don't have that luxury of that time necessarily. So the next best thing to do without harming ourselves or without going into some kind of addiction of some sort is to do the next best thing, which is to just keep moving.
Yep. Stay busy. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you see memes about people who, like, rage clean, I mean, that is
Yeah. I didn't mean to
that
laugh, but I get yeah, I get it.
that can be me for
I
sure.
get it. Yeah, I get
So,
it. I get it.
yeah. And then
Mhm.
the other, I think, biggest thing, is my dad would, get mad at
Mhm.
one of us, and I don't my sister's 4 years older, my brother's only about 16 months older.
Mhm.
So I don't really know, honestly, how it was with them, but he would get mad at me about something
Uh-huh.
and give me the silent treatment
Mm.
to the point of we'd be sitting at dinner and he would not talk to me. He would not ask me past the whatever. And this could go on as long as 2 weeks.
Oh,
And
wow.
so it'd get to this point where my mom would just try to intervene, but she
Uh-huh.
would go, "You just need to apologize and this will be over." And I
Meaning
was
you need to apologize to your
yes,
dad?
yes. even though in my head, I hadn't done anything wrong, he was
Yeah.
overreacting, I was the child, he was the parent,
Yeah.
she was just trying to keep the peace and have things, back to normal, not this, like, tension. So eventually, that's kind of what would happen is every time she'd eventually come and talk to me, and I would eventually apologize, and then that was it. It was, nothing was ever processed, talked about. It was just, so that happened, I mean, enough that I remember it.
Well, it sounds like it was fairly regular, if that's a core memory that you have about it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it was either a silent treatment, it was the yelling, it was just walking on eggshells when you hear that term. That's exactly what it was.
Well, and you think about it as a teenage girl, there's so much that you're going through as it is.
Yeah, and now
Even
especially that, both of us have teenage girls. I mean, I just cannot imagine, like,
yeah. It's very hard for me to that same. Very hard for me to think that, um, they just don't they're just not equipped yet. They're still developing.
yeah, their minds are still
Mhm.
developing. Yeah, and they've got, to them, any problem they have, whether it's with friends, in school, and I remember feeling this, that is like the end of the world.
Yeah,
You know
yeah,
what I mean? When you're a teen
yeah,
or even preteen, I just remember, like, I'd break up with a boyfriend, and I literally thought my life was ending. You think
yeah,
it's the end of the world, and looking back, you can know that, okay, it's not, and it did
yeah.
pass, and we all worked through it, but when now having a kid, it just feels, yeah, like it's never gonna end, it's never gonna
Mhm.
get better.
But it's also you think about too, that is their world. Like, they don't have a house mortgage like we do. They don't have a car note like we do. They don't have to get like, they go to school and they have to deal with their grades and their academics or their sports or their friendships, but those are very, very monumental foundational pieces for them, and for us as parents to expect them to relate to an adult perspective that we've had the distinction of knowing for 40 and 50 years or whatever it is, however long we've been in adulthood, it's just it's apples to oranges. So
Yeah.
good for you for understanding that about your teenage daughter, because I think that you brought up earlier generational trauma, and it's being able to stop that generational trauma by being aware of it, because you could have just as easily turned that self-harm outright, right? You could have just as easily taken that into your life with your children, but instead you chose to address what's going on with you, why it is that this is happening and where it's coming from for you.
Yeah, and we can talk more when we kinda get into my state, the ranch, but that was pretty much my number one goal, was to stop that trauma now. And of course, I wish I had done it way sooner. It's almost 6 years ago I went, so Claire would have been 11,
Mhm.
down to Simon was 4.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that was I remember saying to the women I lived with, "Listen, I love you guys, and I love the ranch, but I do not want my kids to have to come here."
Yeah. Yeah.
That really was my number one goal.
Right.
Um, you know, Obviously, I had to heal and work on myself to
Mhm.
make that happen, but that was really kind of the underlying, reason why I was there after the initial episode of, kind of what prompted me to seek the
Right.
inpatient treatment.
And for those that don't know, the ranch is it's an inpatient facility. It's a treatment facility for mental health
Addiction,
and
yeah.
addiction.
So
Mhm,
it's dual diagnosis. It's got mental health, it has eating disorder,
mhm.
sex and love addiction, and drug and alcohol.
Okay. Yeah, so it addresses a lot, and it's been around for a very long time, I know.
It has. So it's right here in Tennessee, but a
Mhm.
lot of people come from all over to go there.
Yeah,
There's other facilities that are owned by the same parent company all over the country. So there's a ranch, Pennsylvania, and then there's some other locations that are not called the ranch, but they're owned by the same parent company.
gotcha.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your process as you got help as a teenager, and you got that therapy, and there wasn't a lot of understanding about how to stop the behaviors that you were doing. It was just the talk therapy. Do you feel like at that point any of that was helpful for you? Or do you feel like it was just kind of a
No. I mean,
yeah,
I don't remember my really only memory from that time is thinking, "Why does she always wanna talk about my parents?
yeah.
I just want this to stop." I have no other memory. I couldn't tell you her name. I can kind of visualize the drive and the office, but, like, I really can't tell you one positive thing that I got out of it, unfortunately.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
So I go to college in, Virginia, about 6 hours south of where I was in New Jersey,
Mhm.
and I was actually able to move in about a week earlier than most freshmen because my original plan was to join the debate team.
Okay.
So I joined the debate team. I was able to move in early, and my parents and I are getting like mail from like my mailbox. And there's a flyer for the Catholic Student Center. And we're not like, we were not super religious. We kind of went through the basic sacraments, but we didn't like actually go to mass except for like Christmas and Easter.
Okay.
Um, and she's like, well, this might be a good way for you to meet people.
Okay.
I was like, sure, okay. And so I really got connected with the Catholic Student Center and a lot of the
Mhm.
women on my first floor, well, my first dorm, my first year were Catholic and
Yeah.
they were very active. And I met people that way. But I also started with a pretty unhealthy relationship, and it was not someone at the college, it was like someone from the town that,
Mm.
the college was in. He was actually
Mhm.
younger, he was like 17 and I'm 18,
Yeah.
and this relationship was one of those, like, hard and fast, thought I loved him right away.
Ah.
Um, and his that relationship and a lot of my past ones in high school, not all of them, but a lot of them really were just centered around the physical aspect of a relationship.
Yeah.
And, there just wasn't a lot of depth. And when I've done some work on myself, sometimes I think, was I trying to, because I was overweight as a child, um, made fun of in
Mhm.
elementary, middle school, it kind of finally fell away in high school.
Yeah.
Was I trying to find what's the word, love and affirmation through these relationships?
Yeah.
So I'm in this
Or
really
look for approval and
approval, yes.
acceptance
That's the word
from
I'm
someone
looking
else.
for.
Yeah,
Um,
specifically a male figure in your life.
yes,
Yeah.
he's right. I hadn't had that.
Yeah.
So I started in therapy with someone local to my town
Mhm.
or to the college town. And again, I don't remember how I found the person. I think I couldn't have my car freshman year, and so I think it must have been within walking distance.
Okay.
Um, and so I'm in this weird, like, combination of, like, being active in this Catholic Student Center, but I'm kind of new to the faith, even though I've gone through the sacraments up until
Mhm.
that point. I wasn't really active. Well, now I'm going to church every week with these people, and I'm doing, that kind of became my social circle.
Yeah, yeah,
So I have that on one hand. Then I have this, self-harm hidden thing that I'm kind of addressing, kind of not. And
yeah.
then I have this really unhealthy relationship.
Wow.
Um, and in that time frame was also 9/11.
Yeah.
So that was September. I was a freshman. I'm 6 hours from home, and my dad worked in the city at the time, and I didn't know what area of the city. I didn't know if he was Manhattan because he had changed jobs at that point and was not commuting to Brooklyn. He was like in different areas. So I had no idea where he was. I had
Mhm.
an aunt that still lived there. Um, so there was just obviously a lot of different things happening at once.
For sure. Sounds like it.
So this guy was, again, like, lived in the town, and Fredericksburg, Virginia has kind of like a downtown, but it's historic. So it's not
Okay.
like a Nashville downtown. It's like
Yeah.
a really historic area. And he kind of lived down in that main area of the city.
Mhm.
And he lived with his grandmother. I don't remember if his grandfather was there or not, but he did not live with his parents. And so because I had a roommate, a lot of times I would go to him to see him, and we would hang out in this downtown area.
Mhm.
My grades were not great my first year compared to, what I had been doing in high school.
Right.
Um, so the big self-harm incident that happened was during this time. And I am in his house, and his grandma was a very, like, I don't want to say born again because then that sounds like I'm saying something bad about those people, but she was very just like over the top to the point where she was telling me the devil was living inside me.
Oh, wow.
And I don't know what I did that, made her say these kind of things. I don't
Yeah.
know if, I really just, again, don't really have a memory of like what I may have said, what may have brought that on. But I
And
just
it
remember,
probably had nothing to do with it probably had nothing to do with you basically, with it had to be probably have more with her.
yeah, no, or I don't know if it was the relationship. She didn't like the relationship I was in with him. I don't know. So we're standing in her like kitchen, and above the window, in the kitchen, there's like a hutch where there's like a bunch of like little shelving that go up and around and then over the top. So
Okay.
kind of like how some dressers will have a built-in like hutch. It
Yeah.
was like that, but it was in the kitchen.
Yeah.
And I mean, I can remember a lot of this very specifically. Most of the shelves had nothing on them, but this one shelf had this lone razor. And I just kind of grabbed it. And as she's talking, I did a very small cut on myself, right? In a way, in a spot you couldn't really like see.
Mm, mhm.
And then she just kept going, and something must have just triggered this response. And I grabbed it and I ran into the bathroom, and I just slashed at my arm because I forgot I had a razor, not a key. And I split my arm open. I mean, so much blood. You could see muscle. It was really bad. So I'm screaming, of course, because of the blood. And again, like a lot of things I can't remember specifically, but I wind up at the hospital somehow. I don't know if the boyfriend called 911,
Right.
or I guess he would have had to because I didn't have a car.
Yeah.
So I'm in the hospital and I wind up with 20 stitches. And of course, they want to make sure I'm not a suicide threat.
Right,
So
right.
once they're comfortable, I'm not. So again, I'm 6 hours from home. I don't even have a cell phone at this point. This is back in 2001. Yes. I mean, yeah. So like I didn't have a cell phone. So I get in touch with my parents and I tell them, they knew about the self-harm because I'd been going to the therapy. But again, this was just like the worst possible.
Yeah.
And they say to me, if you ever do this again, we're going to pull you from school and commit you to an institution.
Oh, wow. That was
So,
their support.
right. So that response was a huge, huge trauma
Yeah.
because all that did was made me not want to talk to them about anything important, deep struggles, nothing.
Right. It just
So,
made you want to totally shut down.
exactly, I completely shut down. And instead of that motivating me to change, all that did was motivate me to hide things.
To do more of it. Yeah.
Well, surprisingly not.
Okay.
That was my last self-harm, as I say, with an instrument up until right before I went to the ranch.
Okay.
But I was still self-harming in those other ways,
Okay.
biting, punching, pulling my hair.
So your behavior was still happening, but you were doing that in such a private way.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Did
most
any of your
people.
friends, your college friends, were they privy to any of that? Like you said in high school you had a really like a good little modge of folks with you that you felt really comfortable with.
Yeah.
Where did you find that in college to be able to support you in that way?
I mean, I think because it happened so early, like, it happened, I think, in October. So,
Yeah.
I hadn't been there that long.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know at that point if anyone knew. And I don't know if beyond that, my roommate, um, she wound up asking to be transferred out of my room because she did not want to be known as the girl with the roommate Yeah,
Oh,
who so
wow.
she left, I think it was during Thanksgiving break or after Thanksgiving break, she transferred to a different room because she
I'm so
didn't want
sorry.
to. So that was another kind of like, okay, this is shameful,
Yeah.
embarrassing. Again, not that we were very close at that point because it had only been a few months, but that's literally what she said is, you know, I don't want to be known as the roommate to
Well,
this kind of person.
I
So,
think, like, the common thread is that you're not being heard. You're
yeah.
not being seen.
And so another thing that was really hard growing up is my dad was very opinionated, but to the
Okay.
point where anything you said opposite to him that was an opinion, he acted like that was his opinion was fact
Yeah.
and you're wrong. You were always wrong. Whether it was about politics, whether it was about, I mean, anything,
Yeah.
it was my opinion is fact and you're wrong. And so it was, yeah, this not being able to speak freely, not being heard.
And not really having your own identity.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've never thought about it that way, but
Mm.
that's yeah, pretty much what it is. Because everything was right in relation to my sport, to my friends, to right, all these different things. I never got comfortable with who I was as a person until, much, much later.
And it was because you were being told that it wasn't okay to be who you were.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, to be able to get to where you are now, to be able to have a very frank conversation about it is so healing. It's a testament to the work that you've done to get to that through that generational trauma because yeah, it's a big thing. It's a huge suitcase of stuff that a lot of us get to experience without like we didn't go we didn't go through it. Our parents did. And they're again, yes, I understand they are only doing what they know to do and it's
Yeah.
not an intentional situation, but there's a huge suitcase that you think about both of our parents bring to their relationship and then they have children and then all they know, the tools that they pull out of those suitcases are what they've decided to pack for their journey, if you will,
Yeah.
and their awareness and understanding. So being able to be aware of what that is for you and being able to form your own identity, no matter if you're 20, 30, 40, even, it's vital to our soul. And it's vital to our evolution. And to know that you are a valuable person in your community, in the world.
Yeah. I mean, I really even going into the ranch, so I was in and this again might be jumping ahead a little bit, but I was in what's considered, quote, the mental health house.
Mhm.
But you did have women who also had addictions
Right.
and they were placed in the mental health house for whatever reason. Maybe that was they needed to address that more so than the addiction. So I remember, some of these women's story, just me feeling like I don't deserve to be here. These women have gone through so much more worse than me.
Ah,
And they were the ones that said, you are just as worth being here as us. Trauma is not a competition. I like
oh,
to say that to people because
that's big, Erin.
people, I feel like a lot of times are trying to like one up each other in their trauma. And
Yes.
it
Yeah.
doesn't matter if your trauma, like in my case, we call them little T's. So it's a
Yes.
bunch of things that have built up over time.
Yeah.
Or if you have a big T, which
Mhm.
are what you would typically think of rape, natural disasters,
Mhm.
war. Those are kind of
Right.
your big T's. So I have little T's.
Yeah.
And they were really the women I lived with who had been through these horrible things said, you are not any less worth being here.
Yeah.
Trauma is not a competition.
Yeah.
Um, so that was a huge deal to have other people tell me that
Yeah,
and
to
for me
show
to
you.
really believe it.
Yeah, yeah, to show you that you are seen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing, and I love, that, Same in my process. It's the little T's and the big T's in terms of trauma. And no one is better nor worse than the other one. They just are what they are. And we're such complex beings in terms of what we are able to articulate, what we process, and how we do that based on our circumstances that, yeah, trauma is not a competition.
Yeah, and trauma affects people differently.
Mm,
You know, you could have I did have not a rape, I call it a sexual assault,
mhm.
but for some reason or it's just still buried, I don't have the same reaction to it that maybe someone else might.
Right.
And so even with people who have had the same things happen to them, trauma does not affect everybody the same way.
Oh, that's great, a great point. A very, very good point there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me a little bit about you getting out of college. Things are just kind of, you're a high functioning college student because you have all these different, I'm going to call them different identities that you're
Mhm.
taking part in. And some of them are super private, like you explained. How did you get through college? You actually ended up meeting your husband in college, right?
Well, we met right while I was in college, but he did not go to the school I went to. So
Okay.
that relationship ended. We actually technically got engaged after a month or two. This
Your
first
husband and you did?
No, this guy
Oh,
who was
no.
17 and I was 18, yeah.
Yeah.
So then I find out months later, I think after definitely after Christmas break, I find out that he had been, like, cheating on me the entire time. And
Mm.
me still wanting to fix things and still wanting to not lose that relationship, I was willing to let that go, and he was the one that was like, "No, it's not a good idea." So we
Okay.
broke up, I forget exactly when, February maybe,
Yeah.
and we continued to, like, see each other or run into each other, and I would, let him back in, and, but I think it eventually in by, like, April, I said, "No, this is it. Like, we're not
Yeah.
doing this anymore." So that summer, so in between freshman and sophomore year, I go back home to New Jersey,
Mhm.
and my friends growing up, none of them were really super into their faith. I mean, there was some that were Catholic and all
Mhm.
different things, but I had become so immersed in my faith, and really all my friends were based in this faith that I was like, "I'm gonna see if I can meet people in New Jersey over the summer that are the same."
Okay, that's
So I
great.
joined this site called, it's now called Catholic Match. It used to be called St. Raphael, I think is how you pronounce it.
Okay.
And I put my hometown is New Jersey because that's where I was,
Yeah.
not knowing. So Brian had been on this site, and he went to college at Catholic in Washington D.C.
Uh-huh.
and he was on the site, and he started searching for people in New Jersey because he knew a lot of people came from Catholic from New Jersey, New York, New England.
Yeah.
So he found me, and the way the site worked was like I didn't pay for it, but he did. So he was able to like message me, and then we could
Okay.
start messaging independently.
Okay.
So that was how we met.
Okay.
Was on this site, and we just messaged each other all summer. He was in DC working at an internship because he's 2 grades ahead of me,
Okay.
and we're talking online and then on the phone, and then we finally meet in person that October
Mhm.
of my sophomore year, and he was a senior,
Mhm.
and we date for a year. He proposes. So I was a junior, and then we were engaged for 2 years, so we
Okay.
waited till I graduated college.
Right.
I get married back in my hometown, and then we moved to Virginia because he worked for the government,
Mhm.
and we lived in Virginia outside of DC, so a little bit north from where my college was.
Okay.
But his relationship was really a turning point in that, like, when you were saying I had kind of these different personalities or identities,
Mhm.
having his relationship being so founded in our faith, um, at the time, we were both into politics. We were both political science majors, so that was a big commonality, and
Yeah.
so it was like I was now starting to meld where, right, my relationship and my friendships were all really built around, this faith that I had really, really embraced.
Which is totally different than any relationship you'd had, so,
Exactly.
yeah, that's a
Um,
godsend, I feel like, for you,
yeah, I mean, it
based
was
on
and
based
that's
on
why,
where you
like
came from.
and that's why I tell people, like, it was interesting that he was in DC, but he started searching for people from New Jersey, and then he saw that I went to Mary Washington, which is about an hour south of DC,
Yeah.
and so he was like, "Alright, I mean, that's close enough that we can
Okay.
we can see if it happens," and so,
Okay.
yeah, so we commuted, I had a car. I don't think he did. I had a car, so I would basically drive up to him every weekend, spend the weekend with him, and then once he, had a job and I was still in school, it was pretty similar. I mostly
Yeah.
went to him because I was still sharing a room with someone. All 4 years I shared either a dorm or an apartment with someone. So
Right.
he, didn't really ever come and stay overnight. I would pretty much go to him.
Right.
Yeah, so that was really where a lot of things shifted.
But it sounded like it was a supportive, like you said, it was founded in faith, right?
Yeah.
And it was, you were seen in a real and as a valuable individual and as an independent being.
Yeah, and he's so different from my dad. Like, he is
Yeah.
very quiet.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's, so calm compared to my dad or me. I mean, he's so calm. He has just, yeah, this, like, calming presence, quiet, he's not flashy, he's not yeah, I mean, his goal has always been, um, as he says, "Getting you and the children to heaven." That is my goal as a husband, as a father.
Oh,
That's, what we're called to do, is to help you on that journey, and so, it was the first time I
love that.
had someone that purely, like you said, yeah, saw me for me, loved me
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so that was a really big and meeting his family was a huge deal because he's one of 5 boys.
Oh, wow. Okay.
He's the oldest,
Okay.
and his parents, are very, religious and strong in their faith
Mhm.
and seeing just a different family dynamic than what I grew up with.
Yeah. How did that like, when you first met them and you made that realization that this is so different from the way that I was brought up, was there, was there grief or sadness, or was there, "Wow, I really like that this is
Yeah.
amazing," or
No, it was like happiness. It was,
yeah,
"Oh, wow, things can be different and loving and
yeah,
joyful," and, my mother-in-law has essentially been a stay-at-home mom almost her whole life,
mhm.
um, and I just thinking that and going, "I didn't know that was a thing you could do,"
Wow.
and putting so much love and energy into her children, and what she would say is like, even though my kids are older, I want to be available to them to help them. And so, the time I met Brian, she would have still had at least one of the other 4 at home, if not more, because him and his immediate 3 brothers are very close in age.
Yeah.
And then the 5th one is a little bit more than the last. So, yeah, and so it was kind of like that was my
Seems, like,
first.
hopeful for you.
It was, yeah, very hopeful that this could be different. His family is a lot different than mine in terms of, I come from a loud, big Italian family, and they are just way more calmer and
Yeah.
subdued. And so that was, yeah, a big difference was not just meeting him, but being welcomed into his family.
Right, and just seeing the other possibilities. I believe that that had to have been, like, a huge lift for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because growing up, when I would be out playing in the cul-de-sac I lived in, you could sometimes hear the yelling from my house.
Oh,
And so my friend would know, okay, you can't go inside right now. Let's go to my house or let's
yeah, yeah,
keep playing outside or whatever. So yeah, just a very, very different, yeah, experience.
yeah. So, are you close with his family now yet?
I mean, Pretty good. I think it's,
You don't live nearby, do you? You guys are all kinda spread out too.
yeah, so his
Mm.
parents currently live in Evansville, Indiana, which is about 2.5 hours north.
Yeah,
So they are the closest, out of all of his family. All his brothers are spread out, but them being 2.5 hours and being retired, they're able to come down for
yeah,
big events, sacraments, and sometimes holidays, depending on what they're doing. And,
yeah.
George is active in theater right now. So, they're able to come down for his play, that kind of stuff.
Oh, that's
Um,
awesome.
yeah.
That's great. And you have that support, you know what I mean? Like that, and you always have that vision and you're a part of that process that is, so much different than where you started.
And I've been able to be open with my mother in law
Okay.
about mental health, and she's been open about hers. And so that's a big difference from what I grew up with.
Yeah.
You know, they have never judged
Oh, it's great.
me or us for any decision, anything.
Yeah,
And that's a huge deal to have people that you can talk to about anything and not have any sort of judgment.
right, right.
Um, Not
Sounds
everyone has that.
exactly, and it sounds like you didn't have that in your formative years. It was pretty
Right.
judgmental.
Yeah.
You know, as you're developing into this person that you are, you're essentially being told that it's not okay to be who you are, and I don't agree with that, and this is the way that we need to be.
Yeah, and that's why, I trauma, I feel like, is so rooted in you're living in survival mode all the time.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so when you learn that you have trauma or you realize it or you start doing the work on yourself, it's very hard to go from this state of constant survival
Mhm.
to kind of lowering your baseline to this like normal, this is the way I should be living versus this constant state of turmoil or what stress or anger or whatever.
Right, it's unfamiliar for you.
Yes, it's very scary, and that's why I think some people, whether they're in addiction or they're in whatever, they tend to it's scary to live differently, so even though they're living in this survival state because it's all they've known,
Mhm.
it's really hard to make that switch.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
I had a therapist at one point say, "The pain of change is sometimes worse than the pain of staying the same."
exactly. Yep.
So your unknown, which you could be hearing from mentors and from, mental health advocates and from your friends that this is a better way for you to be because it's healthier, but like you said, you've been in that survival mode for so long that trusting that and allowing yourself to feel something different is so foreign and so scary.
Yeah, because even though I knew what I was doing to myself with the self-harm was wrong,
Mhm.
it was safe and it was comfortable and it got the job done in the sense of, okay, I've got all this anger and all this rage because of whatever situation. And most of the time it was not anything big,
Yeah.
but I had all this built inside of me and it was easier it was working in a sense. So even though
Yeah.
it was bad and it was wrong, it was working. It
Yeah.
was doing its job, which was I could, release the anger, release the rage on myself,
Mhm.
and then feel better.
Mm.
Now, the problem was it was this cycle where after a certain amount of time, then it was this intense guilt and
Mm.
shame and self-loathing. Um, and that didn't come until I was older. As a
Right.
teen, I was able to kind of more walk away from it. It
Yeah.
was this finite thing that happened. I could, put the band-aids on, put the
Mhm.
healing ointment on, cover
Mhm.
myself up, and that was it. It was as
Mm.
I got older, this cycle of intense rage and anger, hurting myself, and then it turned into shame,
Yeah.
and guilt and embarrassment and all that stuff.
Well, and probably much of that is that you had matured, you know?
Yeah.
You were not you weren't a teenager anymore with the rapidly changing brain and the emotions and the feelings, not really understanding the context of them.
And now I was older and I had children and a husband and I had relationships that I needed to much different and more
Yeah.
intense and
Yeah.
close relationships that I had to um, protect and I had to sometimes repair depending on um, yeah, so it's different, but that yeah, I mean it's quote served its purpose. And that's why
Yeah.
when I was at the ranch and we would do work on almost addiction work and I would be like, but I don't have an addiction. And they're like, yes, you do. They were like, your self harm and your anger and your rage is serving a
Yes.
purpose,
Yeah.
just like people who have other types of addictions. It's
Correct.
serving them a purpose. And they're like, so when we would literally do work, I would be like, what do I put? And they're like, just insert instead of alcohol, instead of drugs, instead of whatever, you insert self harm or anger or rage. And that was like a whole new concept to me.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
hadn't been given the permission to do that.
Yeah. It was just, I thought I was this horrible person that needed to stop these actions because they
Mm.
were bad.
Yeah.
And that was kind of it. And initially, that's all I was looking for. I knew it was
Wow.
wrong. I just wanted to stop, but I didn't know how.
Yeah. I
But
had a moment with one of my parents when I was in my eating disorder actively, and I remember, again, them doing the best that they could, saying, "All you have to do is write down what you're gonna eat for the day and just check it off when you do it. Just we're gonna just get to the bottom of it. Just gonna get to the bottom of it." And if it was only that simple, we wouldn't have
right.
we wouldn't have eating disorder issues in our country, in our world, right? But yeah, it's so much more. And in my mind, I had started adopting that, which then was a whole other thing you have to unwind, right?
Yeah.
But again, it's what they knew to do. It's how they knew to process it. But understanding that there's so much more to that root. And I think it's really interesting and it bears saying again that trauma is so complex and it's so different from person to person that
Yeah.
it's not just a one size fits all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like most things. Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm. Absolutely. Tell me about how your process went before you decided to go to the ranch for treatment.
So, I had Claire when I was almost 24. I mean, we were very young when we started.
Yeah.
And then I went on to have again 4 total in a short amount of time. And all throughout, my 20s, and then up until I went to the ranch. So I'm 41 now, minus 6 is 35. So
Again,
up
mathing. Look at you. It's
like,
good.
so for that, 15 whatever years of my adulthood, after that really bad incident in college, I did continue to self-harm again in ways that did not involve an instrument, is the way I put it.
Right.
But it was, here and there, or I'd have a small bout and then I'd go months without. And I
Mhm.
was in and out of therapy and I was on and off different medications because, when you get pregnant, there were certain ones I couldn't take.
Right.
Um, so what happened was I had kind of gotten into some risky behavior, as I put it.
Mhm. Okay.
And again, Brian is very calm and he's very quiet.
Yeah.
So when he is mad, which does not happen often outwardly, you know that like
We're gonna take it
it's serious.
seriously.
Right.
Yeah.
So he had essentially caught me in doing something and
Mhm.
I was filled with this shame
Mhm.
and guilt about myself and about my actions.
Yeah.
And I essentially did what I had done in college. I grabbed my keys and I ran in the bathroom and I just started slashing at my arms.
Mm.
And what I told Brian and the people that know is that when we're in this conversation, it was not a screaming, yelly conversation. He does
Right.
not really scream and yell. I just it's almost like you stop listening
Yeah.
and you're in your own head, and I'm thinking about how bad of a person I am and this thing that I've done. And I went to get some water because I'm, like, hysterically crying. So I
Yeah.
went to get some water in the kitchen, and I had this thought that I could just take a knife and just literally stab myself.
Yeah.
And that and then the action of hurting myself again for the first time in
A long
a
time.
long time, I
Mm.
mean, just terrified me.
Yeah.
It really, really scared me because it
Yeah.
had been so long since I always operate under this thing of, well, I'm not doing anything to myself that's that bad. So
You're
it's fine.
justifying it. Yeah.
I'm justifying, right, that it's okay that I'm doing these other things because I'm not doing something so bad like I did in college.
Yeah.
So then when it came up again, however many years later, I mean, I was terrified for myself.
Yeah.
So I am screaming. I mean, I'm like crying in the bathroom. I opened the door and I literally just held my arms out. I went, help me, help me, help me. So I said, call my sister,
Mhm.
call your brother. One of Brian's brothers is a psychologist. And
Yeah.
I said, call your parents. I said, call anybody and ask them what should we do.
Right.
And essentially between my sister, who is like my best friend, and she knows everything, and
Mm.
between Brian's brother, they kind of thought, based on, I guess, what I was saying, that I was safe enough to not, like, go to the ER in a
Right.
sense.
Right. That was gonna be my next question. Yeah.
Yes, so that was, like, the immediate thing was, is this bad enough that I need to go check myself in somewhere, or
Right.
can we pause? And
Yeah.
so basically, that precipitated, the need to, go to inpatient. And I don't know when I first knew about the idea of going to inpatient for mental health.
Mhm.
We had thought about it actually years ago when Simon was a baby. Um, Nothing that bad had happened,
Mhm.
but it was, well, I'm still breastfeeding him. I can't leave him.
Ugh.
So it
Yeah.
had been on the radar that one time. So basically, Brian took the reins and started researching places. And he happened to find this place in Tennessee
Mhm.
that was very good. It's not like we chose it just because it was close. It just happened to be relatively
Yeah.
close.
Yeah.
Um, so you had to just kind of do a quick, like, not quick, but kind of like an intake process over the phone,
Yes.
so that they know they can help you and that they have the space and all that stuff. So I remember I called and did the intake phone call on like a Thursday maybe or a Wednesday, and then being like, "Okay, like, we'll get back to you by the end of the week
Okay.
to see if you've been, quote, accepted." And
Okay.
I didn't hear from them, and that whole weekend, I was just panicking.
Oh, no.
Well, it turned out that they had made a mistake on their end. Either they
Mhm.
called the wrong number or something, but they were like, "Oh, no, yeah, like, you've, been accepted, we can help you." And then it was just a matter of scheduling
Mhm.
when I was gonna go. My sister was actually coming with her family, and so we waited for that trip to be over, um, 'cause, she still lives in New Jersey, so I don't get to see her very much.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we went through with that trip, and then I wound up going on July 8th of
Okay.
2018. And we went into it not having, like, a set number of days I would go. It was very, "I'm gonna stay as long as I need to."
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So we had, made arrangements for the kids because again, it's the summer. Their ages are from 11 down to 4. And so essentially my in-laws and my parents took them, like, came to us and took them for like 1 or 2 weeks at a time and then would
Okay.
switch. And then on the weekends, Brian was essentially with them alone. Like, he was
Yeah.
like, "I told your parents and I told my parents, I'm on duty for the weekend. You guys need a break.
Yeah.
This is a lot for you to
Right.
handle 4 kids over the summer."
When they're
Um,
not in school, right? You think
right,
about
they're not
that.
in
Yeah.
school.
There's
Right,
a lot going on.
he's having to work full time, so
Mhm.
that's basically what we did about childcare. So yeah, I just went into it and we didn't even know if insurance was going to cover this, and they wound up not. Um, I guess they decided I wasn't, I don't know, bad enough or
Yeah.
whatever. So I was completely self-pay. Um, but we, and it's not like we were in a better financial situation than we are now, but we really believed this was life or death for me.
Yeah. There was a
So
choice that had to be made, it sounds like.
yeah,
Yeah.
and Brian's like, "We will figure it out.
Yeah.
We'll do what we have to." I even made him be the person that they would call about finances. Like, I was not even part of the conversation. He was like,
Yeah.
"I want you to be there focusing on you, not worrying about money."
Wow.
So anytime they had to deal with that, it was with him directly.
Yeah. Wow. That's
Yeah.
great.
So that was kind of the as I call it, the acute reason that I went.
Yeah.
And then I get there. So I think, oh, I'm just going there for self-harm.
Okay.
And then you get there and you learn about trauma and you learn about, again, this is a whole new concept to me, the whole little T trauma thing. I had no
Yeah.
idea that was a thing. Again, I think when most people, it's getting better, but I think when most people think of trauma, they think of these very big
Right. Like what you
events.
explained earlier. Yeah.
Yes. So this was just, yeah, a whole new concept.
Do you remember having, like, light bulb moments around that when you went
Yeah, I
in?
mean, that was so I don't know if they still do this, but at the time, everybody had to do kind of like a introductory, like, meeting or session.
Okay.
And they had this giant whiteboard, and
Yeah.
that was where they broke down this concept of little T's and big T's. And yeah, that
Mhm.
was literally like, "Oh, this is a thing?"
Yeah.
And it was, quote, "easy" to know what my little T's were. I
Right.
I could look back at my childhood and go, "Okay, these things were not okay, and these were traumatizing." It was just that word hadn't been attached to it yet.
Yeah. And
Um,
then the shame that you are experiencing through your life at different points that you've talked about is just another way for you to go, "Okay, but I'm not it's not that big of a deal for me because they were little T's."
yeah, I remember saying to my therapist, at the ranch, I said, I don't think I've ever had anybody, like a previous therapist, anybody tell me what I'm doing is wrong or bad," meaning to myself. And she goes, "Well, let me tell you." Like, I don't know
Okay,
what.
I
It's almost
I
like it's like
wow.
almost like people weren't direct enough with me, and I needed someone to say, "Hey, this is not good that this is how you're handling your anger and your rage is by hurting yourself." And yeah, so that was another kind of like light bulb moment. And so when she said, "Well, I'm here to tell you," she was, it's funny because I think she's from Tennessee. I'm not positive, but she was a little bit more like me with like a little bit of like a rough edge and like, but that was what I
Direct.
needed. I mean, she was
Yeah,
very direct, and
yeah.
that was what I needed. I went into the ranch and I said to myself, I am doing whatever they tell me to do.
Oh, good
I'm
for you.
completely surrendering.
Oh, that's
I'm doing
great.
whatever they tell me because clearly I don't know what I'm doing and I don't know how to handle it. And they're the professionals.
Yeah.
And if I'm gonna invest this amount of time away from my family,
I'm
I'm
gonna do
gonna
what I have to
do,
do.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm
I'm
gonna
gonna
do
do what
any of
they
it.
tell
Yeah.
me. Yeah.
Yeah. Gosh. I think that's, the directness. I think for so many people, it's a hard thing for a therapist, I can tell you because I know I've had multiple different experiences where I've had some people that have been, yeah, very direct and some people that have been, "Okay, we're just going to ease into it. We're gonna put a toe in like this." And I think it's hard to know as a therapist exactly which direction is going to be the most beneficial, that's not going to be another that's not gonna make it another little T for you.
Yeah. And that's why as I went through different therapists, when I let in the time I've left the ranch,
Mhm.
I got to know what I needed.
Yeah.
So I remember saying to one therapist, I want you to give me homework because if you don't, what's going to happen is I'm going to have my session with you. I'm going to completely forget about everything we talked about. And then a week later, I'm going to meet with you. And it's just going to be this constant appointments of me telling you about what went wrong that week.
Yeah.
How could I have handled it better? I was like, I need homework so that I am engaged in this process and in this healing every day of my life, not just,
Yeah.
for 1 hour once a week.
That's really big, Erin,
But
because
it took,
I don't know that there's a lot of people that would do that.
but yeah, it just took time for me to understand what I needed.
Yeah.
And I would be able to, and to be able to tell that person that this is how I need you to handle me in a sense.
Yeah. And being able to verbalize that, especially coming from a place where you really doesn't sound like you had much of a voice.
No, not at all. And that was a big lesson at the ranch, was to ask for what you need.
Yeah.
Whether that was in a relationship, from a boss, that was really just kind of a very, like, there was a lot of concepts at the ranch that I felt like were, looking back, seemed very basic. But again, you don't know what you don't know. So until someone tells you, ask for what you need, that it's okay to ask for what you need, you're not going to do that. And
Yeah.
especially if you haven't been modeled that growing up.
And there's been no safety around that.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Because
that's
then
not
you
the first thing you're gonna go to.
exactly.
Yeah.
So it was, oh, I can just handle this myself. I can, right. And so being
And in
able to,
survivor mode, that's what you're doing. I'm just
yeah,
gonna take care of it myself. It's
exactly.
gonna be okay.
Right. Because you also don't want to risk asking for help and then getting yelled at,
Yeah.
or, getting the silent treatment or whatever. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, you're really trying to handle everything yourself.
Yeah.
And so having this basic lesson of being able to ask for what you need, and that's really carried on with, especially with Brian. Like, I would get so mad sometimes because he would, try to be helpful, but it wasn't in the way I thought was helpful.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, I shouldn't have to tell you
Yeah.
how to be helpful. I don't want to make a list, and I don't want to be your mother. And now he's not a mind reader.
That I was just gonna say that. I was gonna say that because I think in relationships, whether it's, a spousal relationship, whether it's, yeah, like a daughter, mother, daughter, son, whatever it is, you have to be able to verbalize where you are because the other person can assume all day long, but assuming just sets you up for a lot of conflict
Yeah.
and misunderstandings.
Yeah. Disappointment,
Oh,
resentment. Yeah.
yes,
So,
yes,
yeah.
the list goes on. Yeah,
Yeah. So I'm a lot better about, yeah, just being direct, not
mhm.
rude, but direct, and just
The
saying,
difference. Yeah,
this would be a lot more helpful for you to help me with than XYZ, what you thought was helpful.
right.
So that's made a big difference.
Man. How you were at the ranch for close to 2 months, weren't you?
About 6 weeks. So I did about 4.5 weeks of inpatient,
Mhm.
which just means that I lived in a house with other women, and you did everything there. Not everything. We did have some programming on what they call the main campus of the ranch, which
Okay.
unfortunately a lot of it doesn't exist because of that flood
Oh,
that
right.
Tennessee had a few years. Yeah, so a lot of their main campus was unfortunately flooded.
Mm,
So, we slept, ate, did a lot of stuff within our group therapy was just upstairs in the same house we lived, our
mhm.
sessions with our individual therapist. We had equine therapy, and our house happened to be next to one of the barns, so we could just walk to equine therapy.
Oh, that's great.
Um, we did have some, like, so I think to kind of attack all the different people and all the different things people were there for, we would kind of travel to different houses for different types of 12-step meetings, essentially.
Okay,
So even though I didn't have an addiction, I was still exposed to a traditional 12-step meeting.
okay.
And I learned there's so many more types of 12-step than just AA.
Right.
There's ACA, which is Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Family.
Mhm.
There's CODA, which is codependency. There's just EA, which is just Emotions Anonymous. So you can take a 12-step, a traditional 12-step AA, and really apply it to anything. And
Yes.
so we had exposure to all those different types of meetings. Like our house, because it was the mental health house, we hosted the EA 12-step meetings.
Yeah.
And then the, drug and alcohol addiction house hosted the AA meetings. And so I'm trying to remember your original question.
You were yeah, we were talking about the time you were there for so
Yes.
long, right?
So
You were there
yeah,
so
so
you were
so that
away
was
from your kids and your family for
so
a
that was
period of time.
so that was the inpatient
Uh-huh.
aspect.
Yeah.
And then I did about 10 days of PHP, which is partial hospitalization.
Mhm.
And so for me, what that meant was I moved to a different house.
Okay.
It was much smaller with much less people. And so really what PHP is you do programming all day, but then technically your late afternoon, evening is quote free.
Okay.
So when I was an inpatient, I mean, almost every hour was scheduled from
Yeah.
the time you woke up, had breakfast together, up until you went to bed. Almost every hour was scheduled.
It's your
So
job.
yeah, it
Your
was my
entire
job.
job.
There was some time on the weekend that we had some free time. So PHP was just kind of a way to step down in your care
Yeah.
and have a little bit more freedom in the evening.
Yeah.
Because we still were on like the ranch property and on campus in a sense, we couldn't just go out and like do stuff.
Yeah.
And then, so if you were in a PHP somewhere locally, it would probably look a lot different.
Right.
So then I did that for about 10 days because we knew I wasn't going to like go to a sober living house.
Yeah.
We knew because of the kids, I wouldn't be able to really commit to like an IOP. So IOP is intense outpatient.
Yeah.
So that was just kind of their way of doing a little bit of a step down for me.
Yeah. And it's getting you to a point where you understand what you could be facing when you have time on your hands.
Yes, it's funny you say that because when I
Okay.
got home, so they give you a discharge plan. And mine was, they found me a therapist within half an hour that took my insurance. So they had that appointment set for me
Okay.
before I even left. Then it was my discharge plan had different 12-step meetings they wanted me to try to, stick with. And
Yeah.
they, again, had a list of all the ones in the Nashville area or if there was any in Mount Juliet. And then one of the best therapies I was introduced to is DBT.
Yeah.
And so we had DBT a few times a week at the ranch, but the woman that did it left partway through my stay to open private practice in Nashville.
Okay.
So I thought, perfect, I'll look her up. I'll continue with DBT.
And can you
And
explain to people that are listening what DBT is?
so DBT stands for dialectical behavior therapy.
Okay.
I love it because it is a very practical type of therapy.
Yeah.
There's lots of coping skills that you learn that you can apply to your life in real time.
Yeah.
And so there's, 4 core skill sets in a sense. There's mindfulness, there's distress tolerance, there's emotional regulation, and then there's interpersonal skills or something like that.
Yeah.
So part of my plan was to look up this person to maybe continue DBT. So I get home and it's now August. So all the kids are now in school because Claire, Nathan, George were all in elementary. Simon was 4, but he was in a special needs pre-K program with our local public school.
Right.
So he was gone. It was Monday through Thursday, kind of a normal school day.
Yeah.
So now I have all this time on my hands. And I thought, I'm going to replicate a day at the ranch at home.
Oh, wow.
And that did not work.
Yeah.
Like that,
Yeah.
I quickly realized to have every hour of my day scheduled in the real world is just not,
It's not realistic.
it's not realistic at all.
Mhm.
Because even though my kids are at school, I still had a house to take care of. I still had things I had to coordinate with their
Right.
lives. I still had to be available if someone got sick, like, so there's still,
Laundry,
I
cooking,
mean, just, yeah, I had
all
to
of
go
it.
back to kinda doing everything.
Mhm.
So, yeah, so I quickly realized you can't just replicate a
Yeah.
day there. You kind of are in a bubble in a good way. I didn't have any access to a cell phone.
Yeah.
So anytime we weren't in programming, we were journaling, we were doing whatever homework assignment they gave us,
Mhm.
we were just hanging out with the people we lived with, we were doing meal prep, we had to do, all our own cooking.
Okay.
And then there was some things that we did within the house that they called them RAs at the time. Now they're called, I think, RBT. But basically it was like not therapists, but it was like other adults that was there to watch over everyone. And if there was any sort of conflict, they were available. Well, they would also plan some activities, within the house. So yeah, so trying to replicate that home just did
Didn't
not
work.
work. Just did not
What,
work.
so what did you end up doing? Were you able to take any of the skills that you were taught and be able to
Yeah.
adopt them in your own in your life to make them fit for what you needed them to be?
So I knew when I left that I was gonna have to continue with some sort of therapy. I
Yeah.
knew that I couldn't just kinda go cold turkey. I tell people the ranch was not a cure, it was just the beginning of my healing and that I was gonna have to continue. So I started with the therapist that they had set me up with,
Mhm.
and then it turned out, like, she didn't take my insurance, I had to, like, submit a super
Mhm.
bill, and it was like half an hour away, and then I just, like, didn't really kinda mesh with her, and
Yeah.
so I then found someone else who was trained in EMDR, which I had had 1 session at the ranch, so I had a little bit of exposure,
Yeah.
and I think at the time, I just thought, "Well, I that's just something I need to do because that's a type of therapy that's supposed to be very helpful," and I only got to kinda dip my toes in it,
Yeah.
and I picked this person because literally it was she did EMDR, she was local, and she took my insurance.
Oh,
So for a long time, I was really selecting people based on the cost and based on insurance
instead of
instead
based
of
on if you meshed with them.
right, what I need. So I wasn't with her very long either. So
Yeah.
then let's fast forward to maybe the end of 2019, early 2020. And I had awareness, like you had talked about earlier, is one of the biggest lessons I got, is just to have awareness of how I was doing, how I was feeling, how I was operating within my world.
Mhm.
And I could tell things were starting to kind of dip again.
Okay.
And I said, I'm going to start looking into an IOP because the kids are all at school. I could do a few hours, a few days a week. I
Yeah.
can make that work.
Right.
So, my friend, who I'm still really good friends with, used to be the alumni director of the ranch.
Okay.
And I reached out to her. She goes, "Oh, let me, help you out." Well, then COVID happened and everything shut down.
Yeah.
So she said, "Well, I've got this friend who does a virtual DBT class." So in early 2020, right around March, I started doing this virtual DBT class
Okay.
because I had not continued DBT in the time I left the ranch because that woman who does private practice, she wasn't accepting insurance.
Yeah.
Her rates were very high, just not something we could afford.
Right,
So
right.
joining a virtual class made it less. He wound up taking me on pro bono though.
Uh-huh.
Um, so that was an expense I luckily did not have. So he
Mhm.
became my individual therapist. So I would meet with him individually. And then I took this quote DBT class. DBT can be kind of intense.
Right.
You're kind of committing to this long term. It literally is like classes. I mean, you're like
Mhm.
learning a whole new set of
I
skills.
was gonna say it's an education,
It
basically.
is. I mean, it's a massive because the point is eventually I don't have to look at my book. I've
It just clicks.
exactly. I've
Mhm.
practiced them enough.
Yeah,
I've been in these classes that I can turn to these skills without even really knowing I'm doing it. That's
yeah,
kind of the goal.
yeah.
So, I did, the entire coursework. I met with him individually for a very long time. And, as I started feeling better, I would, reduce it to every other week.
Yeah.
He recommended my current psychiatrist, who I do pay out of pocket for, but she is worth, I mean, just
Oh,
every penny.
so great.
So I've been, stable on medication for a long time.
Yeah.
There's maybe been one time in the last year or so when I went, I feel like I need just some sort of adjustment. I'm a little bit more irritable than, kind of normal.
Yeah.
And so she increased one thing a little bit, and she gave me like an emergency anxiety medication that I've never had to use, but
Right.
I have it.
But, I think what's really, I think, credible to say here is that you wouldn't have known that stuff about yourself to know, okay, something's happening, something's going on, and like to catch it before it gets like becomes this huge snowball down a hill and then it's out of control and you are totally out of sorts with what to do, where to turn, how to act, and how to help yourself.
That's exactly it. Is when I've given my talk in the past, what I say to people is don't feel like when you leave the ranch that you have to stick with this discharge plan that they gave you,
Yeah.
because as life happens, things might have to change. Or, like in my case, we had a pretty significant trauma happen to us meaning me and Brian collectively.
Mm.
And I then had to seek out a different type of therapist who
Yeah.
specialized in religious trauma.
Yeah.
And so again, right, if I hadn't gone to the ranch and I didn't have that awareness,
Yeah.
it
Things would be
it
so much different.
things would be so much different. And
Yeah.
that is, I tell people it's okay if it takes you a few therapists before you find the right one.
Yeah.
It's okay if it takes you a few psychiatrists. It's okay if it takes you a few medication changes, that as long as you're still trying, and
Mhm.
again, you have that awareness about yourself. Like I said, I just felt myself dipping is the best way I can describe it. And I thought, okay, I don't want to get to a place again where I self-harm or I have to go back to inpatient. Like I said way in the beginning, I love the ranch and I love the people I lived with, but I did not want to have to go back. I
Yeah.
wanted this to be a one and done thing,
Right.
and I didn't want my kids to have to go. Um, and it's not that there's anything wrong if you need to go back to inpatient for some reason, but because I have a family and I have so many kids, I really need to take advantage of this time and do the work coming home
Mhm.
once I'm home so that I hopefully don't ever have to get to that place again.
Well, it sounds like that was a lot of your motivation as well, part of your driving force and your driving factor on addressing what's going on with you to be able to be present in your home and be as whole as possible in your home.
Yeah, because I wanted to obviously stop hurting myself. That was the number
Mhm.
one goal. But I didn't want to fall down this I had fallen down this kind of road of yelling and screaming and getting so angry with the kids the way my dad had.
Yeah.
And I could see how it was starting to affect them. And I remembered, of course, how it affected me.
Uh-huh.
And I would, well up with this like anxiety of, I would say to people, I am screwing them up. I am messing them up. And it was this intense fear, especially with Claire, because she's the oldest and she's my only
Only
girl.
girl. Yeah.
It was, I do not want her to be scared of me the way I was scared of my dad.
Oh,
And
wow.
so, I like to say that, like, yes, my children and my relationship with Brian was my main motivation, but I think people have to keep in mind whatever type of like treatment they're in or therapy, that it still needs to be for you.
Yeah.
I still need to like myself for me as a human, independent of being a mom, being a wife, being a sister, being a daughter. It still has to be for you. But
Right.
because I had these 4 young kids who, were in their formative years, I also knew that I needed to kind of try and stop this behavior that they were seeing out of me that was so detrimental and just scary. I
Right.
mean, and I would see it on their face. And then, of course, again, there's a cycle of the shame and the guilt
Right,
that
right.
would come from, okay, I had this explosive episode, they're crying or they're scared, they're running away. And then so that's when the shame and the guilt kick in. And I think one of the biggest another big lesson from the ranch is they're very big on Brene Brown, which I'm sure a lot of people have heard of.
Yes.
I actually behind me, I don't know if you can see it, but that is the quote, the Teddy Roosevelt quote that she uses in one
Mhm.
of her books. It is like The Man in the Arena. It is just one of my favorite quotes. And so we have
Yes.
it printed up and hung up. But one of the things in one of her earlier books is talking about the difference between shame and guilt.
Yeah.
And I didn't know the difference until I went to the ranch. So
Mhm.
shame is when you believe something about yourself in your core. You say to yourself, I am a bad person. Guilt is when you say, I've done something bad. And that is
Mhm.
a huge, huge difference
So it's a very fundamental difference. Yeah.
because guilt, I think, can sometimes be motivating. You
Right.
know, if you feel bad about something you've done or how it affects someone, then you can look at that and go, okay, I need to do better. I need to do
Mhm.
different. But if you're constantly saying to yourself, I'm a bad person for who I am at my core,
Mm. Yeah.
that is just so, so different. And so I really had to relearn at the ranch and through, my faith and different Bible studies and different books I've read since I've been home that I am worthy as I am in God's eyes in these relationships.
Mhm.
That I am what I do poorly or what bad decisions I make do not define me as a person. Those are not my core values, that those are mistakes I've made, and I am
Right.
not the only person that has made mistakes,
Right. Right.
which
You're
is
not alone in that. Yeah.
right, which is why this podcast and why I like to talk about my story is, like you say, just knowing you're not alone has so much power in
Yeah.
that. Because up until I got to the ranch, it was never talked about except with my sister because we had a very similar, upbringing. Even
Right.
though she's a little older, our experiences were very, very similar. And so she was the only one I really could be open with and talk about. It wasn't until I was with other people who, again, our stories were all different, but we had a lot of commonalities.
Right. Right.
And focusing on those commonalities really helps with your healing and
Absolutely.
your, yeah,
It's that
progress.
relatability and that connection to another person and that the empathy that it brings up, and then allowing yourself to garner that empathy from another individual that really truly is giving that pouring that to you when it's something that you may not have ever had and may not have ever been given.
And then I'm able to extend that to other people
Yeah.
because especially, like Simon, my youngest, is on the spectrum. And so we are just currently struggling with some certain behaviors. For him, he'll kind of have something that happens or focuses, and then it will switch. So
Yeah.
right now we're dealing with kind of a particular behavior at school and at home. But what I tell people is I actually have more patience with him, even though he's my quote most challenging child,
Yeah.
because I think to myself, it must be really hard to live in his mind and in his world and constantly be having to think about how am I supposed to respond to this? Or,
Right.
so I actually have like more patience and more empathy. And that's why I'm also able to look at my parents and say, they had a lot of trauma, probably a lot I don't even know about.
Yeah.
And I'm able to look back at a lot of the things that they did or things that they handled with me and say, um, it wasn't probably wasn't always about me
Right.
and that they had all this other stuff. And so I used to be I feel like I used to be very like a black and white thinker,
Yeah.
very harsh. There's rules that you follow and you don't follow, and everything is black and white. And over time and having that empathy factor, you learn that not everything is black and white.
Absolutely.
and that, being involved in my church and in our faith and being in Bible studies and lots of reading, it sounds simple, but it took time for me to learn the lesson of like, it really is all about loving people where they are.
Yes.
Sure, you might not agree with some of the things they do or say, just like I've done things I've done and said that I don't like.
Do we all have? Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
But that doesn't change that we need to love people as they are.
Yeah.
And I have to turn that internally.
That's the point. That's a drop the mic moment right here because it's I think it's a lot of times easier for people that have gone through trauma to be able to empathize outwardly for other people and with other people for their process and their experience. But the worthiness that you've been talking about through this whole talk is something that's really, really hard for us to be able to mirror back to ourselves.
Yes,
And good job.
we always think we're the exception. Like
Yes. Isn't that crazy?
when I think about, forgiveness, God's forgiveness, um, it's very easy for me to apply it and say, well, of course God forgave that person. Their one sin or their one mistake is not how I define that person or look at that person. But for some reason, I have such a hard time accepting
Yeah.
forgiveness for myself. I still say to myself sometimes like, well, that was just too bad. That was just I did something so horrible that's
Mm.
just, too
Mhm.
much.
Mhm.
And
But
same
there's
with
a
like,
difference now though for you. You may go there, and I think that's the thing that I hope that people can hear is that it's not that it's gone. It's not that the chapters in your book, so to speak, have been erased or pulled out or thrown away. It's just that you have a different understanding of what happened and how to articulate those triggers when they come up now. And that's really healing. That's growth.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, being able to accept my emotions as they are, to sit in them. That was another big lesson. We had to learn first to identify. Some people, myself included, I think, don't realize, that some emotions we might think are one thing and they're kind of more something else. And
Right.
so we would start every group therapy. We'd have to go around and say, you know, what we were feeling or what our emotion was. And we were not allowed to say things like sad, mad, fine. Like we had to really kind of think and dig a little deeper.
Right.
And then learning just to sit with them that it's okay to feel your feelings.
Mm,
Like
mhm.
that was another just like concept that like, because in my head it was you have these feelings and you have to immediately get rid of them. How do I get rid of this anger? How do I get rid of this sadness instead of just sitting with it and going, okay, I'm angry and that's okay.
Mhm.
Anger is not a bad thing.
Yes.
It's how you react to it. And that was what I had
Yes.
to learn was I don't need to react to anger by hurting myself, yelling, screaming, raging, all this stuff. But right, you have to be able to sit with it long enough to recognize what it is.
Acknowledge it.
Acknowledge it. Yeah, name it, literally name it,
Yeah.
and then figure out how to handle it differently. And
Yeah.
that's why DBT I love so much because, some skills are about, okay, you're at this level 8 of 10 of anger. How do you
Mm.
get yourself down to maybe a 4? Not that
Yeah.
you're not gonna get yourself to a 0
Yeah.
quickly or perfectly, but how do you get yourself to this level where you can then address whether it's an argument with another person,
Mhm.
let's say you're dealing with some company that you feel like did something wrong and you're trying to address it, a doctor's office, anything. How do
Yeah.
you kind of take a step back and calm down enough to address it without just immediately reacting
Yeah.
out of anger and rage?
It's learning to manage that.
Yeah, it's learning to manage it and learning to have all these different skills, knowing when to take a break and walk away.
Oh, yeah, good point.
That's probably Simon's that's the biggest skill we're trying to teach him right now
Yeah.
because he gets so annoyed with George. Like, poor George. So
Oh, no.
George is a 12-year-old middle school boy, and he can
Yeah.
be kind of annoying, but
Yeah.
sometimes Simon gets annoyed with him just by for him existing.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what it is, but George will walk in the room and Simon just starts yelling at him.
Yeah.
Like, "You're being annoying. You're da 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 da." Um, so I don't know where I was going with that, but
Well, it's a process. It's
yeah,
all a process.
um,
Oh,
yeah, so just, learning these skills. Oh, I know what it was. So one of our big skills with Simon is maybe you just need a break.
yeah,
Maybe you
yeah,
just need to walk away from George for now. For him, because of his, sensory sensitivities, we even say you can put headphones on in the house, like,
yeah,
because they share a bedroom, so they can't always get away from each other.
yeah,
Um, or sometimes George is making noise in the other room and Simon still hears him. And we're like, we're not telling George to like leave just because he's trying to make himself food. So
yeah.
you can control how you're reacting by doing XYZ. And so
Yes.
taking a step back and taking that break, whether it's from a conversation with a spouse, a child, that's a big one. Another one of
Mhm.
my favorite skills for DBT that I tell people is it's just called paced breathing. So it's just
Okay.
another type of breathing where you breathe out longer than you breathe in.
Yes.
You breathe in and you hold, and then you slowly let it out. But the idea is that you breathe out longer than you breathe in.
Okay.
And, in the book, I think it's like, oh, breathe in for a count of 5 and out 7. Well, you
Okay.
can adjust that if your lung capacity is different or
For
whatever.
sure.
But that one I love because you can do that anywhere you are. Some of the
Yeah.
skills are dependent on if you're near, let's say, an ice source. I don't know
Yeah.
if you've
It's
ever
a
heard
beautiful
about
way.
sticking your face in ice
Mhm.
water.
Mhm.
Well, if you're out somewhere, that's not always practical. So
Yeah.
paced breathing is my favorite. It's kind of my basic go-to
Yeah.
skill.
Yeah.
Um,
It's a great one.
yeah,
It's calming on neurological levels, all the physical levels, as well as that emotional management, if you
yeah,
will. Yeah.
and that's really the core of DBT
Yeah.
is right, being able to manage all those things
Mhm.
at once or recognizing what you need to manage.
Yeah. Well, I just wanna say, I think that the recognizing that's a great word, and if I could say 2 words that kind of, sum this up that are really buzzwords for me about everything you spoke about is recognizing and being and an awareness.
Awareness, yep.
Yeah.
That's pretty much my number one thing I tell people because people will say like, if you could quickly sum up like what you got out of the ranch, without giving this long talk,
Yeah.
that's number one essentially is awareness because that
Awareness.
can cover
Yeah.
so many things. Yeah, awareness and the flexibility to change the course you're on.
Oh, I
So
love that.
so for me, that was changing therapists. That was
Mhm.
maybe taking a break from therapy. That was when I first got home. I mean, I love reading anyway, but of course, at the ranch, you have a lot more time. And so, they had a little bookstore, and I bought a bunch of books, and then a bunch I just wrote for later. I'll buy them later.
Yeah.
But sometimes I would go to a coffee shop, and I would literally just go with my book and my highlighter.
Yeah.
And I would almost like I was reading for
Yeah.
a class for myself. And that's what I would do. And I've fallen away a little bit. I'm reading a lot more fiction because at the end of the day, with this many kids, you just want to
You just need to
escape.
separate. It's just a s yeah, you just need to separate. But
Yeah,
it's different. I wanna acknowledge this, that is a different departure, if you will, than, um, neglecting your emotional state or running away from it or staying busy for the sake of not addressing it. It's a
exactly.
it's
And
a different thing.
that's a skill that, people would fall into is so we were not allowed back in our room once programming started until we went to bed. And that's because they didn't want people to isolate
Right,
because it's
right.
really easy to isolate
Yeah.
and to use the skill of walking away and taking a break, but extending that into isolating
Mhm.
and just refusing to address the problem.
Yeah, yeah.
Or, whether it was a disagreement with someone I lived with or whether it was, you know, a homework assignment I didn't wanna do. Um, so that was why they kind of enforced that. They didn't want people to isolate, and
Yeah.
so there is kind of a balance of taking that break when you need it, but
Mhm.
not doing it to ignore the problem.
Right. Right. Gosh.
Yeah.
Erin, this has been really, really great. I've really, I've really enjoyed hearing your story, and I say that with all the integrity, all the gratitude, all the honesty, because I think it's so valuable for you to be so transparent about your process and to be so open with that, because there are so many people that are, if you could look underwater, yeah, their head is just above the water, but underneath their arms and their feet are just flailing and they're trying to figure out which way to go, which way to orient. And there's a lot of fear for a lot of people about stepping out and being able to address what's going on under the surface for them. So I applaud you for doing that work, and for doing that work, first of all, like you said, for yourself, right? And getting healthy for yourself, but then being able to extend that out to your family and to
Thank
your
you.
to those dear people close to you. So that's a really big deal what you've been working through and what you have worked through. So it's a very big deal. So for what it's worth, I'm very proud of you.
Thank you.
Oh, I think it's great. It's great.
Thanks.
I don't want to get away from our conversation without doing our some rapid fire questions though. This is always a hard thing to go from a kind of an intense conversation to something like, "Oh, we're going to turn the wheel."
No,
But I
it's
also
good.
want people to know that you're a human just as much as you share that side of you. I want people to know that as deep as you can get in your stuff, you can also have another part of you that is lighthearted
Yes,
and
definitely.
enjoy laughter and can
Yeah.
be yeah, can be open to things. So we're going to throw some rapid fire questions your way.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. So these are fun. If you had to change your first name, what would you change it to?
Okay, so this question I loved because when we were thinking of a name for Claire, we didn't know what we were having with any of our kids, so we had to come
Oh,
up with
what wait, what whoa. You have 4 kids and you didn't find out any of them?
Yep, yeah.
That would drive me crazy.
We just it was so much fun, and we just had all the neutral stuff, and then
Okay.
once a kid was born, we got, the quote gender specific, but
Yeah,
so we had to come up with a name, boy and girl. And so for
okay.
Claire, Brian and I could not agree. We each had our favorite name and we could not convince each other. So Claire was like our compromise name. I loved the name Sally.
Okay.
And I know I don't look like a Sally, especially if you think of like Peanuts. She's blonde, but like I don't know what it is about that name that
Yeah,
I have always really liked. And then the only other option I could think of is my grandma, who I get again lived with us, so she was a big part of our life.
yeah.
I would maybe want to be named after her. Her name was Dorothy. Um,
Oh, I love that.
I don't know if I'd go by
Cool.
Dorothy or Dottie or what, but
Oh, I could see you being a dot. I could
yeah,
live with that. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Oh,
yeah,
that's really dear. That's sweet.
yeah.
It's a big connection to your family. That's nice. All right. Question number 2. Cannonball into a pool or dip your toe first?
Oh, Cannonball.
Ah, really?
Oh, yes. Get it over with. Jump in there. Yeah. Yeah,
Rip the
definitely.
Band-Aid off.
Exactly. Rip the Band-Aid off. Yes, definitely Cannonball. I do that at the pool when it's still cold. I'll do that when I go to the beach. Yeah, just
Wow.
run and jump in.
Have you ever done a polar plunge, by the way?
I have not. I think I could do it. I think I could.
I
I
feel
think
like you probably could.
yeah,
I'm such a wimp when it comes to being cold. That's like somebody challenged me to do that one time, and I was like, "Yeah, no, I'm good with you calling me a skipper out around this one.
right.
I'm all good with that one. It's all good with me." All right, question number 3. Given the power, what holiday would you create?
So I would create a day because I love reading, where
Uh,
all you do is you stay home and you sleep and you read. That's
okay.
it. You have no responsibilities. And I know you could maybe argue Mother's Day can be like that, but when your kids are really young,
You're
that's not a
still on.
possibility. So I want a day where nobody except maybe essential people, nobody's working, there's nothing open.
Wow.
It's almost like having a day of COVID
Oh
when
my gosh, you're right.
where
Yeah,
we couldn't go anywhere, but
yeah.
the focus is literally just sleeping and reading. That would
It's
be
like a
like
self-care, self-soothing kind of thing.
yes.
Oh, everybody should be so lucky to do that. What would we call it? Let's call it, um, I'm not gonna say National Readathon Day, but like you say, uh, re re
Sleep and read day, sleep
it's
and
like
book day, sleep
book day,
do
book
nothing day. Yeah, something.
nothingness day. I'm sure that's probably out there somewhere. I have to Google that up.
There probably is like a national reading day or something, but,
But I mean, for I like your idea about it's like everybody except the essential workers, and then they can have their read day, like, the next day or something when the next shift comes in. Okay. Question number 4. What is your current favorite store?
so my initial thought was Amazon, but I feel like that's kinda cheating because it's
Okay.
online and it has everything,
Yeah.
so I would say McKay's, which is for people that aren't from Nashville, it's the local used bookstore, and
Yeah.
again, I love to read. I could just spend hours going up and down those aisles.
It's
So
a great
yeah,
store.
I have some friends that that's what we do as part of like when we get together is we might go to eat, but
Wow.
then we'll just go to McKay's and we'll just wander the aisles together.
Oh, Erin, that's
So
beautiful.
yeah, so that would be my favorite.
Oh, I love it, and it is a great store. Shout out McKay's. That's really good
Oh, yeah,
stuff
it's the
for
best.
sure. Alright, last question, number 5. What is the best advice that you have ever received?
So I was thinking about this, and a lot of the advice I've gotten that has been good has been through the ranch. And one that I haven't mentioned yet is, and I like to say this to other people, but especially to yourself, is to give yourself grace.
Yeah.
So I take that to mean to be patient with yourself. And so when people are, all up in their own stuff and they're really upset about something they've done or haven't done, that's what I'll try to say is,
Yeah.
just give yourself grace. So that's probably my number one a takeaway.
Oh, that's great. I
Yeah.
think that's a really nice sum of everything that you've talked about that you've been in,
Yeah.
from where you started and all the processes that you've had to go through to get to this point. And I also just will, as a caveat, you're still healing. We all are still healing. We're all still on this journey. But the great thing about where you are now is that awareness and that understanding about what it is that is happening when it's happening.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that
And yeah, for forever it will be healing or things will always bad things will always happen or whether they're big or small. So yeah, just being able to give yourself grace, I think is really important.
I agree. I
Yeah.
agree. Oh, well, Erin, I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day. I hope that
Thank
you can
you.
have some time before the kids maybe get home from school.
Well, I gotta leave to get Simon in maybe 20 minutes.
Okay.
I pick him up and then George goes straight to the high school for play practice. We're in the last 10 days before the play, and
Okay.
then Claire drives her and Nathan home. So
Okay.
yeah.
And the evening begins.
And then yeah, and then it just all starts. Yep.
Oh, well, I hope the play goes brilliantly as it's getting ready to open for him.
Yes. Next
And
Thursday is the first day. Yep.
okay. Well, I'll be interested to and excited to hear about how all that goes. That's something he's really enjoying, I know.
Yeah, he's got a, pretty decently big part. He did in his last play and he's really just kind of found his niche.
It's
Niche,
great.
niche. Yeah.
Niche, niche. I
Niche.
get niche. I'll take that. I'll take that.
Yep.
As have you, because your conversation today has been really brilliant. I'm just gonna let
Thank
you know.
you.
So pat
Thank you.
yourself on the back.
Thanks.
You've done a great job sharing your story. So
Thank
thank
you.
you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you so much for your time, for your openness, and for your vulnerability.
Well, thank you for agreeing to interview me.
Yeah.
I really didn't ask for a long time because I'm like, well, my story's not good enough or it's not whatever. And then when Amanda gave her story, because Emma and George are very close,
Yeah.
they were at Holy Rosary for so long, and even since they both left, they've become friends. And I thought, I'm just gonna ask, what's the worst thing she can say? No.
No, yeah, no, it's and I think a lot of times when people reach out about, "Hey, I'm inquiring about being a guest on the show, but I'm a little bit concerned that my story isn't X, Y, or Z." It's that I everybody has a story, and everybody's story matters. It
Yep.
all matters, you know? You matter. You matter, and I'm glad you're here.
Yes. Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you for doing this and having this.
Aw, you're welcome. You're welcome. All right. Have a great rest of your day, girl.
You too.
I will. Thank you.
Bye.